these sessions are all being recorded, so join the Cyber Guild on our website and you can access the recordings and all, you know, half the stuff I look at again I miss. It's a bit like the Dairy Girls on Netflix. You need subtitles. It's brilliant. I'm on my second showing, so sometimes you have to watch it again just to get the richness of what's being talked about. It was lovely. So I'm going to invite our next panel, and I need my glasses for this. Our next panel is talking about an inclusive workforce, unlocking mindsets, looking at mindsets to unlock to make a more inclusive and better workforce. Our moderator is our good friend of the Cyber Guild for many years, Tiffany Gates from Accenture Federal Services, Chris Womack, Dr. Kim Young-McClear, Lalisha Hurt, who won an aisle, and Greg Crabb. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Come on stage, gang.
Bad bitch o'clock, yeah, it's thick 30. I've been through a lot, but I'm still flirty. Is everybody back up in the building? It's been a minute, tell me how you're healing. Cause I'm about to get into my feelings. How you feeling? How you feel right now? Oh, I've been so down and under pressure.
You're probably wondering about Lizzo, right? It's a great song, first of all. But I unfortunately can't be at the reception tonight because I'm taking all my female leaders. We're going to the Lizzo concert. So I think wonderful. That's why that got picked. She's amazing. For those of you who know who Lizzo is in the room, but not just a good female leader in the pop culture community, but body positivity, everything. She's amazing. So I apologize I won't get to spend the evening with you, but you know, I'm sure it will be fun. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you all for being here. I do want to start, this is a little way I like to start panels, simply because you probably never know why we get picked to be up here in the first place, right? You need to be passionate about the topic, and this is their opportunity. I'd like to let them introduce themselves and let them give a quick story on why they wanted to be a part of this, why they want to participate, a story on themselves. And listen, this panel is going to be fun. We're running a little long, right? And I know lunch is supposed to be at noon. Just hang in there with us, right? You won't be that late. Just, it's going to be fun, I promise. So please, let's start with you, Greg. So.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you, everyone, for having me. My name's Greg Crabb. I run a small consultancy called 108 Cyber, but prior to my retirement from the government service, I was Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Postal Service for 6 years. And in that role, I had the great pleasure of being able to cultivate women leaders who I think are very important to being able to bring together this community. So I'm really excited to be here and love to share some of that in the course of today's conversation.
Great. My name is Lalisha Hurt. I'm an industry advisor at Splunk, where I'm responsible for elevating C-suite conversations, providing thought leadership, and really helping federal public agencies drive business outcomes. Prior to Splunk, I had the opportunity to serve in deputy CISO and CISO roles, where a big part of the job was building high-performing team cultures. And so I'll share a little bit of story of why I'm here. Earlier in my career, very, very early on in my career, I was about to do this big thing, and at least I thought it was a big thing. I was about to purchase my house, my very first one, and I probably was 23 at the time. My family came in, we had movers, we were super excited, and then I got a phone call on a Saturday from my boss. She said, "Hey, Lalisha, I know you said you're gonna be moving this weekend, but I really, really need you in the office ASAP because it's busy season." And I thought to myself, probably not the best response to your boss, but I was 23 and I hadn't quite perfected my communication tactics, and I said, yeah, I'm not sure I'm really gonna make it. I'm really doing this important thing. I got all these people here. I'm not gonna make it. And I started panicking. I was like, did I forget to do something really, really important or wrap something up for a customer on Friday before I left? And she said, nope, you did everything you needed to do. It's just our culture to have everyone in the office, nights, weekends, butts in seats because it's busy season. And I remember saying, well, that doesn't make sense to me at all, especially since I did all my work, got everything completed. And I said, it sounds like we have a culture that's not driving any sort of impact or outcome outside of fatigue, burnout, and employee attrition. And so needless to say, I did not stay there very long after I left. And so did that team that was working nights and weekends. And I realized at that very moment that the culture that we set for our organizations, whether intentional or unintentional, it can and will impact our workforce. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation today.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Kimya McClear. It's a pleasure to be sharing the stage with my fellow panelists. So a little bit about myself, I'll be brief. I wear many hats. A lot of people actually tease me a bit because they say, you do that too? So I'll just kind of list a few of the hats that I wear. So I'm currently a senior officer in U.S. Coast Guard. I'm actually going to be retiring in less than a year. I'm super excited about that. I've done my 20 and served proudly. I'm currently also on loan on special detail to CISA, headquartered in Arlington. And within CISA, I've been supporting the front office, Director Easterly, overseeing from a workforce engagement perspective a lot of our cultural initiatives, kind of from a ground up grassroots efforts approach. I've been helping out draft our CISA strategy, which was just released online just a few weeks ago. And then I also sit within the cybersecurity division, and specifically I'm a senior advisor for our training and education team, where we oversee a wide portfolio from K through 12, outreach to nonprofits that are looking at how can we create a more robust training and educational system across the nation, and also with academia. And the other hat that I wear, I'm also tenured faculty at the Coast Guard Academy. So I love to learn, love to strategize, and again, just thank you for having me.
Well, that's hard to live up to. My name is Chris Womack. I am Senior Director of GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance at Deltek. 20 plus years of experience in building great teams. And I'm just here because I'm really passionate about building a diverse team with different skill sets, different perspectives. And I can honestly say my team right now, 50% women, and they are all rock stars. So glad to be here today.
Okay, and as the moderator, I am here to provide color commentary, but Tiffany Gates, I was the CEO of Novetta, and we just recently sold to Accenture Federal. Prior to that, I was a naval officer, and so have had a long and interesting career within the cyber community before cyber was even one of the words, right? I mean, it used to be, SIGINT was a thing, Navy cryptologists, but, and then it was information warfare and information operations as computers have just sort of taken over our lives. We've really seen a lot of opportunity for advancement, regardless of race, sexual identity, neurodiversity. We look and we want everyone who is qualified to help. And so the panel you have before you today is not only government, it's working with cybersecurity in the commercial arena. You've got a whole panel of expertise and background in the different areas in which cyber plays a part. And you heard this morning on what does the future workforce look like. So our panel is really on, okay, if you're trying to build an inclusive workforce, table stakes, right? We all know that's going to give you the best, most collaborative environment. But how do you draw those people to your organization? How do you build a culture where people want to come work for you? And so we're going to kind of focus in on those issues, all right? So the first question is actually for all the panel members, but we know there's a cybersecurity talent gap. We've heard about it today. And with the millions of jobs globally that we have a scarcity of talent for, I want to know sort of when you hear about the skills gaps and the impact to your specific flavor of business, what are you doing within your organizations to sort of address how we can bring those skills in-house and attract the talent who want to then come work for you? And so let's start with Lalisha.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I know we talk a lot about skills gap, but I like a word that you use, Tiffany, opportunity. And I actually think we have an opportunity gap, and that means that we have an opportunity to do more, right? And that means to do more by providing access to things like education and economic security, career navigation support, simple things like that, as well as quality jobs. And so the way we tackle that is by embracing a holistic approach in connecting diverse talent to those economic opportunities. And this includes things like, as opposed to just throwing them into a role and saying good luck, right? It's pairing them with people that can set them up for success. It's doing job training. It's providing peer network and support, inviting people to forums like this, right, where they have access to professional network. And I think by doing those things, we're connecting the talent to the resources that they need. And a lot of times, many people just don't know the resources that are available to them. And that leads to, unfortunately, the attrition, the low productivity, and even sometimes missed business outcomes. So we definitely have work to do in that space.
Kim?
Yeah, thanks. Just to add on to what Alicia was sharing, and I think it says it's a lot of this, similar parallels as well. To maybe take a slightly different take to it, this is at least my personal perception. So CISA is a relatively new agency, just a few years old. And so where I sit in training and education, we had an opportunity last fiscal year to really kind of experiment a little bit with some of the congressional authority that we have to see how we can essentially leverage some of the funds that we already have to see how can we really, as was eloquently stated before, on this opportunity gap, right, versus skills gap. So if we take the mindset that there are talented folks that are already out there, right, how do we in government, how do we actually find those talented folks, right? So that's actually a little bit of a mindset shift. And so one of the initiatives that we oversaw is we actually said, you know what, it actually should not be a barrier. If you do not have a college degree, that should not be a categorical barrier for you to actually enter into cybersecurity. And of course, we all know the costs associated, if you go to a four-year institution or community college. And so one of the initiatives that we set out to embark on last fiscal year is we put out a solicitation of funding of notice of funding opportunity, NOFO. And we actually had two nonprofit organizations that were selected, Cyber Warrior, and the second one is NPower. And CISA has 10 regions across the nation, and actually, and we didn't plan it this way, I went through a competitive process, but by selecting two nonprofits, we awarded $1 million each, and they have 3 years to expend those funds. And so they really specialize in how do they reach out to folks of all different backgrounds, whether it be neurodiversity, racial diversity, diversity by veteran status, and so on and so forth. And so geographically speaking, we're also reaching people in rural areas as well. So out of CISA's 10 regions between those two nonprofits, Cyber Warrior and NPower, we're actually reaching 8 out of 10 of our CISA regions across the nation. So I'm really excited to see where programs like that are going to take us, because it really kind of dispels this misconception that only a certain type of person can really be in cybersecurity, when we all know we really need all types of people. So kind of why I say it's a little bit of a different spin to the question, because I think by us being forward-leaning in that sense, right, this was something that CISA had not implemented prior to last fiscal year. I think it actually made people within CISA actually excited, right? And we say, wait a second, if we're doing those types of programs externally, right, we're awarding funds to an external entity to shore up some of those gaps across our nation. Can that maybe inspire us or motivate us to actually look at more creative solutions in-house? And so it's been really exciting to kind of see this relationship where we can actually deploy that creativity as a federal agency to the national workforce, and then also learn from these nonprofits, learn from our partners, whether it be at HBCUs and so forth, and actually take some of those best practices and then try and roll those out as pearls of wisdom, right, to our own workforce retention. So just wanted to kind of amplify that perspective that at CISA we really sit in a unique position where we're both trying to close down the national shortage while we're also trying to diversify our own workforce internally.
Yeah, so I think Simone did a good, she referenced this earlier, that, you know, we've created this problem. All of our technology is plug and play, and we want all of our employees to be plug and play. You know, we won't have certain roles in the team, and we want someone to be able to just walk in and immediately start adding value. And so that we're all going after the same candidates. And I think this is going to take a mind shift from, you know, where I'm sitting behind the, you know, the hiring table to look and see, not can this person immediately step in and, you know, run this technology, but step back to a more basic level. What drives them? Why, you know, what are they interested in? How are they at problem solving? Because that, in managing my team, that is a constant refrain that, you know, a lot of times we get wrapped around the axle of like, oh, we need to throw this technology at it or throw that technology at it, but really it's what problem are we trying to solve? And then go look for the right people that are inquisitive, that are eager to pursue those things. And that's who we need to be going after.
And I think echoing some of what panelists have talked about, I believe that cyber is a people problem and that soft skills are extremely important to be brought into the cyber domain. And I believe that there's a lot of focus in information security and cyber around technology, and I think there's too much focus on those disciplines from a technology perspective, and we need to think about how do we bring in the skills that are necessary in order to be able to communicate risks across the organization and get the prioritization on the types of things that we need to do to identify threats, address vulnerabilities in a systemic way. And I think it all comes through better people skills from a talent shortage perspective.
It's interesting too, because I think we always try to solve the lack of having enough people with, well, if we just had better automation and you know, better software, we wouldn't need as many people. The reality is you still need people to be innovative and creative and create that technology and implement that technology. And so it sort of gets lost, I think, in the message. But that brings up a good point. So we've sort of talked about, you know, the talent gap as it exists, and it sort of kind of buckets into, there's a capacity problem, right? There's a capability problem, and there's an affordability problem. So for the Splunk and the Deltek panelists here, Alicia, Chris, which one of those do you feel is like the, you know, speaks to you the most? Which one of those do you think is the biggest challenge to your organizations where you need to be placing investment in the commercial world? So.
Yeah, so for me, capability and capacity speaks to me, and the reason why I say that is because I actually do think we have capable, talented professionals out there. We just have to meet them where they are and give them exposure and access to the resources, as I mentioned earlier. The challenge I see, and this is across industry, is with affordability. When we look at large corporations in the private sector of the house, they have a huge advantage over those in public sector when it comes to pay. There's a huge, huge disparity when we look at roles like cyber engineers, analysts, and even CISO roles. And that's a challenge in this talent war. And so I was having a conversation with someone who I used to lead in public sector, who's now at Splunk. And originally she was in a customer success role and she wanted to get into cyber. So we gave her an opportunity. It was her first cyber role on my team at the time. We trained her up. We gave her all of the resources to be successful. She got Splunk certified. And then one day she came to me and she said, Alicia, I got an offer from Splunk and it's 40% more than what I make now. And I really need to take it for my family. And knowing her situation, all I could say is congratulations, keep in touch, and I hope our paths cross again, because in public sector, I just couldn't compete with that, right, given the budget that I had. And so I share that to say that until we level the playing field across the board, and it's true in cyber, but I'm sure it's true in other industries, we will continue to have this challenge. I was reading an article the other day, and sadly it said that women, for every 58 cents that a woman makes, her male counterparts makes $1. That is truly disappointing, and it's something that we definitely have to fix today and going forward if we want to recruit more women in cyber.
And I would say, I would agree as well, that capacity is probably the primary driver or challenge, with contributors from capability and affordability. I think they all sort of feed one another. But I think it's historically because of how we've been approaching it. Like I said a moment ago, we've created this monster, and now we've got to find a way out. We've got to change our way of thinking. It really, decompose the roles that we're trying to fill. Figure out how we can approach this in a more creative manner. Get those, I've talked to several candidates before that wanted to get into security, but the bar has been set so high that, or of the solid requirements that have been laid out there, that it makes it difficult for someone to turn the corner and say, I want to move from being in finance to work into security, or I want to, come from audit or whatever the case may be and move into security. So I think, breaking down the things that we're looking for, and again, like I said, the problems we're trying to solve, and figure out who would be good for those roles. And I think that will help solve a lot of the capacity problems, because there's a lot of great people out there. We just need to figure out how to tune their skills to what we're trying to do.
So this next question, it's sort of two parts, because one, Greg, I'd like to hear from you as an investor in cybersecurity companies, and Kim, as someone who's trying to run education and training programs. And in our efforts to attract more talent, train better talent, bring more of that talent in, we're dealing with a CR today. I mean, there are problems out there, but where do you feel like we're having to make sacrifices? Where do you think that internally we're having to shift our focus away from other things in order to try and address these challenges? And so I'll start with Kim. I mean, we'll get there till December 15th, it sounds like, but
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the question. Before I directly answer that, I do want to share just a little bit about kind of my world outlook a little bit. I'm a dreamer, and a lot of people have criticized me. They say, your mind's too much in the clouds, it's not realistic. And I think it's definitely challenging when we're operating in an environment where you're not sure when the next vacancy is going to be filled. Your teams are spread thin. People are burnt out. They're on the verge of being burnt out. And it can certainly be a very frustrating time. I guess the dreamer in me, and part of my vision and my leadership style, and it is actually, I think, echoed on the previous panel as well, but there's a humanity in us, right? And when you see that your teammates are struggling with whatever the issue may be of the workday, to include things like burnout, I think it's really imperative that we obviously not stop the mission, right? But we have to be human, right? We have to be able to imagine a reality where we can actually do both. We can take care of each other. We're human, right? Humans will always be needed. And I believe that when we actually take care of people, and I hope this doesn't sound cliche, the work will get done, right? But when you neglect people, and neglecting people doesn't need to be so malicious or intentional. Neglecting can simply mean you don't check in on folks as often as we know we should be checking on folks. When you have this virtual hybrid, kind of state that many of us are still operating in, to one person they may say, the teleworking option, is a huge benefit, and I would put myself in that bucket. But we also have to evaluate, right, each person individually, right? On the previous panel, I believe they talked about accommodations. My personal belief, I think it's just being considerate. Are we bold enough to consider other people's needs, right? And so, sorry, what was the question?
It was, as you're trying to track this talent, sound like you have a lot of programs going on.
I was like, little humor, sorry.
Yeah.
Little humor. So what I'm basically getting at is what could be perceived as a sacrifice, I actually don't think it's a sacrifice. I actually think it's just being good humans, being considerate of our colleagues' needs. And sometimes it also means pushing up, right? pushing up the chain. And sometimes that can be difficult, it can be very stressful, but it's needed because something has to give, right? Something has to give. Doing everything all at once is not sustainable, and usually who pays the price are people. And we see that through our retention rates or lack thereof, right? We see it through burnout, we see it through mental health, absenteeism, presenteeism, people taking sick leave, and so forth. So from my vantage point, I think it is absolutely imperative that we actually invest the time to make sure that our staff, our teammates, our colleagues, our teammates are doing well. And sometimes that actually means putting a hold to those meeting agendas for the day, for the week, or however much time it takes to make sure that people are actually taken care of. And I would assume that most people probably through COVID-19 have probably experienced maybe learning something new about a colleague that you did not know before that was maybe going on in their personal life. So again, for me, I'm a bit of a dreamer, but I believe to a fault that if we invest time in taking care of each other, it's really not a sacrifice. I think it's really an obligation for our humanity. And when you do that, we're going to take care of national security, we're going to take care of our organizational mission needs. But the absence of doing it, you really don't have either. So I fundamentally care about people, and I think when you care about people, the talent will rise up and people will actually thrive.
Tiffany, I think that when you select the right people, it's not about making sacrifices. I believe that cybersecurity skills can be taught. You just need to find the people with the aptitude to be able to acquire those skills. And it warmed my heart earlier to see Heather Dyer up here. Heather and I worked very closely together for a number of years, and she admitted that she was not a cyber person. And it was about 4 or 5 years ago when I needed a director of identity and access management for the Postal Service. And I have had a huge workforce to be able to select the right person from. And at the time, Heather was responsible for the business application that brought in nearly $40 billion of the Postal Service's annual revenue. And she knew the customer very well. And so there was nobody better in my organization to bring in to be the director of identity and access management than somebody from outside the discipline that I could bring in. And she said she knew nothing about cyber at the time. Well, she knew a lot more about understanding the needs of the customer and how that customer lifecycle journey is managed than anyone else in my cybersecurity practice. So by bringing in that skill set and then cultivating her, and she ultimately got her master's degree in cybersecurity and now sits as the Chief Information Security Officer of the Postal Service. That, I think, is not sacrificing. I think that's finding the right people, cultivating the talent, and building them into the leader that you see in them when you're sitting across the table from them 4 years ago. So.
Okay. Good answers, both of you. However, I'm hoping to sort of dive into, as we look at the amount of budget we have, and we know we can only spend it in certain areas. I'm just wondering, are there priorities that are falling behind while we try to catch up in this area? But I'm gonna sort of segue that into maybe getting some commentary from our other two panelists, because if we could take your answers, which it is always going to be about the people. I mean, this is a people business first and foremost. And one would hope those investments we're making are paying off as we really start putting a focus on this, such that the next generation coming in behind us, they're certainly more tech savvy sooner. They certainly have better awareness, privacy or lack thereof, depending on the age of your child. And so we have this workforce that's coming in. I'm just curious, and we'll go to Greg and Lalisha on this one. But do you think with the workforces that are coming in, you're having to adjust your cultures to sort of allow that to be a more inclusive workplace for them? Are you making those adjustments now as you're attracting the new talent?
Do you want to go first, Greg?
Either one.
Go for it.
So, there's a couple parts to that question. I'll be brief on the two parts. I think that from a workforce perspective, we need to make the investments. We need to prioritize investments in education and developing the workforce. And when I inherited the information security practice of the Postal Service in 2014, we'd been the victim of a nation-state breach. And I had an under-resourced, undereducated workforce. I sought out Carnegie Mellon. We implemented a big training program to bring my workforce up to speed. The second part of that question, you talk about inclusion and diversity. And we've talked about it a couple of times today, particularly in the second panel, the lack of retention of women in cybersecurity. And what prioritized inclusion and diversity for me in my information security practice were two incidents that appalled me. I had in two different physical locations that I managed, I had sexual harassment issues. And I realized that I had a cultural problem in my organization, and as a result, for the next 2 years, my primary discussion points were transparency, courage, valuing the team, consistency, to bring in an inclusive and diverse workforce. And you have to prioritize those if you're going to be able to support women in this field, because unfortunately, the male-dominated aspect of this workforce really is a challenge to the long-term sustainability of women in cybersecurity, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to solve this challenge in the future of making sure that we're shaping our cultures and our organizations to match the next generation workforce. And I'm truly concerned about the next generation workforce and making sure that the organizations that we have aligns to their needs. And Tiffany, I want to share another story if we have time. I think it may resonate with folks, and that is my sister. She is a millennial, and she is in higher education, not cyber, but higher education. And she called me the other day in tears. She is literally trying to navigate the culture of a new organization that she just joined a couple months back, and she basically said, I'm overwhelmed. There's no way I can be successful in this environment. I don't have the tools and resources, and I don't feel supported. And so as a big sister, I had to resist, right? Jumping in, coddling, wanting to problem solve. And I asked her, I said, did you have this conversation with your manager? And she said yes, and she went through the dialogue of what she said, what her manager said, and I learned two things in that moment. One, it's really hard to listen to your sister weep on the other end of the phone and not being able to solve it. But then two, I learned what was important to her. It wasn't the pay. It wasn't the type of work she was doing. It was simply she needed flexibility. She needed to be able to balance her professional life and her personal life. We had just lost our grandmother. She was struggling, and she needed support. She needed to know that she could step away from work. And lastly, she just wanted to be valued and seen for the professional that she was. And I share this to say that sometimes we think we have this great, magnificent culture. We know what our employees want. We know it's important to them. But a lot of times we don't, because we don't listen and we don't ask the question. And I think that's truly important if we want to create this diverse and inclusive workforce, because we have to ignite the culture. And so what does ignite mean? And I have this playbook, and this is a takeaway. I love takeaways for these. It's identifying the culture that you have today, as well as the culture that you want to have, and understanding the roadmap of how to get there. G is get other people involved in that outside of just your leadership team. You want to generate ideas, you want to generate thoughts from your employees, and make sure that you're getting the buy-in early on. N, I like this one. This is nominate culture champions. These are people who exhibit the behaviors and the values that you want to see show up in your culture, and give people a point of reference for what the North Star looks like. And at Splunk, we have what we call quarterly value awards, where we recognize individuals who are fun, who are open, who are disruptive, innovative. And it's a really big deal, right? And after a while, people start, positioning themselves for those awards each quarter, and before you know it, they're shaping your culture. Which is implement and adopt a talent strategy. We adopt business strategies, we adopt budget plans, we do all this planning around everything else. We should have a talent strategy. And if that strategy includes, hey, I want more women in cyber, perhaps we should think about our job descriptions. Are we using inclusive language to encourage women to apply? If we want more talent, we should be sending our HR and TA folks to forums like this where women are, right? This is a great resource to recruit individuals into your organization. And then T, this is a tough one. And if you guys have the answer to this afterwards, please let me know. But this is, think about what a successful culture looks like for your organization. And if you can measure it and quantify it, please, please, please see me after this, because this is a tough one. And then lastly, I would say E, and this is my favorite, empathize, listen, and listen again to your employees, to your customers, to your partners, because their demands will and can change, and you want to make sure your culture is shifting accordingly. Ignite.
That's right. Well, it's super important too, and I feel like many of you come to a conference like this and you want to understand how we're doing it, how we're getting forward. But did you invite someone to this event? Did you send this event to 3 of your friends and encourage them to participate? Are you mentoring somebody who might want a career in this field? And this is something everyone needs to be asking themselves. I think that's a great acronym. I just want to end because we always spend a lot of time talking about all the problems we're having and how are we going to get better at doing this. But so if we could just end really on what are we hopeful about in the future? Because this is a great community. This is a great field to be in. It's certainly not going away anytime soon. And Chris, what are you hopeful about for the future?
I'm hopeful that we recognize the challenges in front of us, but we're committed to creative thinking about how we're going to solve them. That we're going to seek to build diverse teams, not because we're trying to check a box, but because I need that diversity. I don't want everyone looking at something the way I do. I need different perspectives. I need different backgrounds. I see an awesome team, kind of like a heist movie team. You're not going to hire everybody to come in and be the mastermind, and you're not going to hire everybody to be the getaway driver, but you need an amalgamation of lots of different people to make an awesome team, to make a difference.
Thanks. I think for me, I first want to also just acknowledge families and loved ones in Puerto Rico that are still attempting to recover from Hurricane Fiona. And we know we have other hurricanes tracking throughout the Caribbean and Florida. So I just want to acknowledge that first before I answer the question, because oftentimes it's very difficult to find hope. When we look at the news cycles, it can be quite demoralizing. So for me specifically, what gives me hope is the creativity. It's the imagination, it's the compassion, and it's really those micro moments where people actually discover something new about a colleague or a teammate that maybe they didn't know before, and they start to demonstrate the courage to maybe start to ask different types of questions. Tell me more about your autism. Tell me more about your religion or your non-religion, right? Tell me more about your family in Puerto Rico. How can I support your family, right? So for me, that gives me hope, is seeing these micro behavioral changes. Because when we see those changes, that's really where change starts, right? Change doesn't really occur on a macro overnight perspective just like that. Change begins really with each of us, and I think when we can see those micro behavioral changes, just simply starting with how are you doing today, right? So that really gives me the most amount of hope because it's something that is within each of us to actually be better people, and sometimes it gets hard, but that actually gives me the most amount of hope is those micro behavioral questions that we ask. Are we doing okay? How are you doing? How can I support you?
Yeah, for me, I'm hopeful for a lot of things, but I'll try to keep it to two things. So one, I'm hopeful we'll no longer have these conversations around skills gap, and we'll be talking about an opportunity to embrace thinking differently about the skills that are truly, truly needed to step into a cybersecurity role. The second thing that I'm hopeful for is I'm hopeful that one day, just one day, our cyber workforce will be a mirror and it will reflect the demographics of the country that we live in. And it really takes all of us, women, allies, jointly working together to create those inclusive and diverse work environments that we can all be proud of in the future.
Outstanding response, and I mirror that hope. And for me, the hope is, I think, one of the education system and really cultivating the talent. I'm an advisor to a new program at Virginia Tech to cultivate transition into cyber, and I think that there's a lot of opportunities for young students going to Nova or to other four-year degrees that can transition into this field and be extremely successful, because I think those that grassroots type of education process will really help meet the diversity needs that we need in this field.
Well, great. We're a little bit over time, but I really appreciate you all being here today and your perspectives. So I would hope we could give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much. Now, I do believe we're between you and lunch, so let's get off the stage, is what Debbie's saying.
You had my hippo comment this morning. You don't get between me and lunch. But worth every minute. Thanks very much. Round of applause, everybody. We have an amazing set of panelists after lunch. If Chris is in the room, we're going to pivot, Chris. Do you love that? He's gone somewhere. We do have a great panel after lunch that's going to talk about shining your light. So come back. We're going to switch from the more organizational messaging into very personal stories and shining your light and unleashing your own potential. And as I think about everything we've talked about this morning, a lesson learned way too late in my career for those poor people who used to work with me and for me. To be a strong woman is not to be a hard woman. And that's a lesson hard learned by me. And I can't remember who said it, maybe it was Kim, was saying about micro behaviors or something. And I know that I did a lot of work later in my corporate career around microaggressions. So I'm sitting here thinking about micro acts of kindness. So micro kindness comes to mind, and I just love that thought. Thank you very much. So we have lunch. The lunch is served next door in the exhibit hall. Go see your exhibitors. Make sure you put them through their paces about getting a job in cybersecurity, what they're doing around inclusiveness. Are they supporting the Cyber Guild more? Things like that. And your little owls, remember, please name our little person. Put your cards in the buckets. And we will see you back here at 1:05, 1:05. So you've got a good 45 minutes for lunch. Have a good time. Make connections. Have fun.